I think the most dangerous misconception that I see regularly is that GTM is a series of campaigns. And that's just simply not true.
When organizations are rolling out large-scale change, there can oftentimes be a lot of pride and ego that can show up in various different stakeholders. And sometimes I've seen it be somewhat of a political chessboard.
AI is a co-pilot, right? But we're not going to give the entire flight responsibility to AI.
If you're ready to stop wasting time on fluff and instead learn how to build unstoppable teams, future-proof your career, and lead with clarity under pressure, then you, my friends, are in the right place. Let's dive in. The biggest risk for executives today is not AI taking over your job. It's the mental fences that you don't even realize are keeping your strategy small. Welcome back to the Infinite Leaders Podcast, where we explore what it really takes to lead in the age of disruption. Today's guest has one of the most fascinating career journeys that I have ever heard. He started out as a frontline paramedic, rose all the way to deputy chief, before making the leap into the corporate world, where he's now a fractional GTM officer, keynote speaker, and adjunct professor. David LaCombe helps executives and boards break through what he calls mental fences, those invisible limits that we put on growth, innovation, and culture. From improving cardiac arrest survival rates to conducting research with over 130 CXOs on marketing and customer experience, David has lived urgency, strategy, and execution at every level. In this conversation, we dig into the realities of go-to-market leadership in the age of AI. What's hype, what's humanly irreplaceable, and how leaders can avoid the blind spots that derail strategy. So if you're ready to think bigger about growth, innovation, and leadership, then this episode will help you break the fences holding you back. David, welcome to the show. It's so great to
Wow.
have you here. It's such an honor to be here with you today. And,
Same.
one of the reasons that I invited you to the show is because you have really seen go to market from every single angle. You've worked across many industries and many organizations, and you've experienced, rollouts firsthand in many different types of environments. So in your mind, what would you say is the single most dangerous misconception that executives have about go-to-market today, especially in the age of AI?
I think the most dangerous misconception that I see regularly is that GTM is a series of campaigns. And that's just simply not true. Really, it's an operating system, and it's based on having a deep empathy for the struggle that your customer is trying to overcome. And it's interesting that the more that you spend time watching customers, they actually become a little immune to their problems sometimes. So simply sending a campaign saying, hey, if you need this, we're your guy, doesn't work any longer. We have to get
Mhm.
deep into the customer mindset, walk in their shoes and figure out what's going wrong and what have they chosen to do about it and how are you relevant?
Yeah, so good, so good. I hear this a lot too, and I feel like executives often think that GTM is mostly a playbook for sales and marketing. But I love what you say that it's actually an operating system for how the business competes in the market. Um, so if you get it wrong, I'm imagining that you probably miss a whole lot of revenue opportunities.
Yeah, for sure. And look, here's the problem with playbooks. They've been written in the past about the past. And business
Mm,
is incredibly dynamic, right? That winds are constantly changing. One day, tailwinds are propelling you, boosting your confidence, thinking that you've got this figured out, and then the winds shift, and now you're facing headwinds or crosswinds, and the plans that you had right before are no longer relevant. So you start missing the target, and it becomes compounded. It gets even worse when we become overconfident on our decision making, right? That, well, we had this figured out. This has always worked in the past. This will work out in the future. And that's really a quick shortcut to a disaster.
mm, mm. Yeah.
Wholeheartedly agree. Like everything is changing all the time. In fact, let's talk about AI because that is the shiny object of the decade. But leaders often cannot tell what is hype versus what is humanly irreplaceable. So, in your view, where do you believe that executives should be doubling down and where should they be slowing down?
Well, let's kind of paint a picture of where we're kind of just coming out of. Like it just seems like we're starting to emerge out of the growth at any cost phase, where there's been a significant toll taken on tech industries and other industries, thinking that we could sacrifice all other things for the sake of boosting quarterly profits. And AI has become attractive to some who think that thinking could be perpetuated. And the word of caution, right, is that AI is, and I think that we need to be clear on what type of AI we're talking about. That I think still generally we overgeneralize, right, of AI being all things artificial intelligence when there's many different kinds. What I see in my practice is most businesses are using generative AI, which by definition is always looking backwards to make,
Mm.
some of your tasks or your thinking or to transform a blank canvas into some progress, right? As being helpful. And that's true. It is. But abdicating critical decision making or functions to AI is really again, a shortcut for a disaster because it's not taking into account the, you know, externalities of like just all sorts of what if questions that are based on forward thinking, not past thinking. So,
Hmm.
if you try to boil it down into a short answer, is AI is a co-pilot, right? But we're not going to give the entire flight responsibility to AI.
Hmm. Hmm. So, how can leaders be utilizing AI as it pertains to go to market strategy?
I think first is understanding where they are in terms of their own performance as an organization. That many times when I work with an organization, they always have, ambition to grow, either in their current market or to expand into other verticals. And um, if you know where you are with respect to your goals, you'll also likely know where you're struggling, right? Is it the cost to acquire new customers too high? Is it that you can get new customers, but they don't stay with you and they leave? This then becomes the kind of the pathway for you to say, look, we're struggling here. We think that we've got smart people who could be augmented and made even smarter by the use and application of technology. That's where it's purposeful. We've got a mission in mind, right? Let's improve, churn by 20%. Let's get referrals to increase. It's not directing, different functions within your organization to say, adopt AI for the common good. And why don't you give us a budget and a business case, right? This ought to be much more intentional than that.
Oh, that's so good, and thank you for the metrics and the examples there. I'd
Yeah.
actually love to hear a more tactical example. Like, can you share a story where go to market, the execution actually changed the trajectory of an entire organization? Like they had such a tight strategy in place that it actually transformed the entire organization.
Yeah. The first one that comes to mind was pretty recent, where an organization had a portfolio of products that they felt were, part of their legacy. Many of these products, had been, developed by the founder, and now we're 8 to 9 years in, and we're finding that overall, right, the earnings per share of the company are going down. And when we started to use AI to look at like what is the actual P&L for each product, like within a group or a platform, it
Hmm.
was astounding, right, to the people who are even the closest to the business to understand that some products were much more profitable than they had thought. And the ones that they thought were the hallmark of their existence were really declining, right, rapidly. And so it speaks to the mental fence part of the introduction that you did when we got started of we all have biases, right? And especially around things that are dear to us. that, you might have a blind spot. So this is a good analysis capability for AI to go and look deeply about, the historical performance of products, and to
Mm-hmm.
give you a graphic visual sense of like, this is how it's really performing. That
Mm,
it may not necessarily know what to do about it. Because again, those are forward-looking statements based on external market dynamics that you can't always control, but it'll pinpoint for you. Like this is something that you need to have a conversation with and you need to give some thought about.
fantastic. What would you say is, in my experience, because I've done quite a bit of consulting, particularly around change management, when an organization is going through very large scale, massive change. And in my experience, it's really about culture and action. So if an organization already has a healthy culture and people are working well together, then the change is much easier to facilitate. However, if that's not there to begin with, then sometimes it's just chaos and really you have a really difficult time implementing the change and getting everybody moving in the same direction together. So I'm guessing the go-to-market strategy and the actual execution of it could be the same. Can you speak to like culture and action and how that relates to helping an organization take a product to market?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question and an important one, because if you've seen one company, you've seen one company, right? So when we talk about really healthy culture, even in that genre of different organizations, there's probably a lot of variability. But I'll give you a specific example that comes to mind. It's around functional pride, right? So sales organization, marketing function, customer success, all have attended the kickoff meeting at the beginning of the year and they know the big company marching orders, right? And then they go
Mm-hmm.
back to their respective functions and they execute, usually kind of as business as usual, occasionally interjecting a little bit of the current campaign buzzwords, right, to show that they're at least aware, right, of what's supposed to be happening. And then things
Mm-hmm.
start to break down. For example, we'll find that uh, pride and ego can keep functional leaders and line workers from really kind of asking questions like, are we sure we're right about this? Shouldn't we go and have a conversation about marketing about their perspective? Or shouldn't we go and tell customer service or customer success what we're promising as part of our value proposition and brand experience to the market so that they can deliver it? And when that doesn't happen, when you're so sure about your way is the right way, things break down pretty rapidly. And it
Mm-hmm.
it takes a bit of empathy that's constructed, right, and reinforced, right. And when I talk about reinforced, I'm talking about rewarded, incentivized, where people realize like we can't do this together. Sales can't do this by themselves. Marketing can't do this by themselves, and customer success is depending on the other two. So when we talk about GTM culture, the best ones that I've seen that have been intentionally created usually were the result of rising from the ashes of disaster, right? It's pretty rare that I see, a first time hit out of the park where a new organization nails GTM. It's usually because they've got leaders who've experienced dysfunctional GTM and they've realized there's got to be a better way.
Mm, mm, So good, so good.
Are you the leader that your company cannot afford to lose? Or are you the one that they quietly replace during the next reorg? AI, layoffs, and shrinking budgets don't just take down low performers. Even top leaders get cut if they're not seen as indispensable. And that is why I created the Executive Edge Audit, a fast, powerful diagnostic for high performers like you that will give you your irreplaceability index, showing you where you stand and what's at risk so that you can prove your value before someone questions it. You'll also receive an executive risk report that allows you to pinpoint blind spots, strengths, and vulnerabilities so you can close gaps before they cost you a promotion. And finally, you'll receive a 6-month performance accelerator plan, complete with a boss-ready case for why your org should approve budget for your continued growth. So don't wait. Head on over to infiniteleaders.vip right now.
You covered so much inside of that. And when organizations are rolling out large scale change, some sort of big initiative such as go to market, there can oftentimes be a lot of pride and ego that can show up in various different stakeholders. And sometimes I've seen it be somewhat of a political chessboard, of how do these different groups work together or not work together, and how do we get everybody moving in the same direction together. So what advice do you have for senior leaders who are grappling with these challenges on a daily basis and, working across silos and different parts of the organization that might have different competing agendas? Like how can we get everyone aligned so that we all see what the mission and the vision is and we're actually marching towards the same results together?
Yeah, why don't we think about different categories of tools that the senior executive team has, right, for being able to get coordination between the different functions. The first one that is not always popular, but it does work, is aligning variable compensation, right? That historically, the way sales teams are compensated versus marketing or customer success are quite different, right? And if there's a variable piece, it might be a profit sharing, but you could also tie it, right, to the actual behavior changes that you want to see too. That we all
Mhm.
win, right, with customer acquisition, or we all win with customer retainment, or we all lose. And I think that gets people's attention pretty quickly. It could also, it is a double edged sword that people can sometimes also feel a little bit threatened. Like this wasn't the way that it used to be when it used to be really great around here, right? And so we start
Mm.
questioning things. So there's an element of listening. I was having a conversation with some peers recently about the term alignment, often thrown around of like, hey, we need to align on this particular topic, or are we aligned on this particular thing? And it's interesting, like we could be aligned that I understand where you want to steer the organization, but that doesn't mean you have my commitment.
Mhm.
And so, when we're looking for alignment between individuals or, a line of sight down an organization, it's I know you can recite the goals of where we're trying to go. Tell me how you're changing, right? And how can I support you to be able to get there? And that's a different kind of conversation. If people in the line organization start visiting with executives who are mid-level and higher, and the conversation eventually turns to like, I know this is a big change, I know this isn't maybe what you signed up for. Tell me what this means for you, like how you're going to have to think differently, and what is it you need from me, and like focus on quality of life type of stuff. Like, when I ask the question like, what do you need from me, it might mean that they've asked IT 10 times, right, to fix this application that they're struggling with, and they can't seem to get, on the project management board. Great, I'll go fix that today, right? And now I've built trust with that group so that they know I'm listening and I'm trying to help them. So I find that every time that you give an order, it comes with a heavy, heavy reciprocal responsibility. And that's, what can I do for you? And I don't see
Mhm.
that often practiced enough.
Mhm, mhm. Oh my gosh, you bring up so many great points. In the work that I now do with team and leadership development, I see a lot of the same things that you're describing here. That really, it's ensuring that everyone is clear on the
Yeah.
goals, that we have like we're all committed, we're all moving forward together, but that we have inherent trust, that we all have the best interest of each other's teams, that we can work together, and that if there is conflict, we actually have the skills to break that down and move beyond that. And I think a lot of that really does stem from trust inside of the relationship. And I love that you said sometimes it's just as simple as, what do you need from me? What do you need from me? And then taking the actions to follow up on that so that people know, hey, I know you've got my back. I know you're going to take care of me and my goals, and you're concerned about my team, what we're up against, and yeah, giving people what they need so that everyone can work together more effectively.
Yeah, that is so well said. People can spot double talk, corporate speak from a mile away. And that,
Mhm.
the term authentic, I think everybody knows it and uses it, but practicing it is a whole other thing, right? So I would encourage executives to like really sit down with themselves and go, what does it really mean, right? To the
Mhm.
people who, are entrusting me, right, with the leadership of this organization to be authentic. And how can I
Mhm.
do that? Because if you kind of just leave it to, well, I know it'll come up in the moment and I'll do the right thing and I'll come across authentic, it usually doesn't, right? So,
Mhm.
and I think also asking for feedback. It's interesting.
Mhm.
I'm a pretty easygoing guy, but if you were to look at my face, and I've heard this dozens of times over the years, people might think, Dave, you're stoic, right? I'm just thinking, and I'm just kind of like in the moment and whatnot. I'm not the guy who's going to light up the room with a smile. So I have to be that much more intentional of when I'm going to go meet with teams of purposefully smiling, engaging in, talk that matters to them, not just small talk for the sake of talking about the weather and asking for feedback. And sometimes the authenticity that you think people need, maybe it's not hitting the mark. So ask the question like, how am I showing up for you? Like, is this working
Yeah.
for you? And
Yeah.
having grown up in a very authoritarian, right, type of work setting as a paramedic, it's very military type of command and control structure. Um, I didn't have a lot of leaders who came to me and said, "Hey, how can I show up for you?" It was like, "Do this and do it now."
Yeah.
So it took a lot of learning, and maybe unlearning for me too, to be relevant in business.
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's so good. And I love how you're phrasing your questions because you can ask for feedback, but what kind of feedback are you asking for? And it's like, what is it that you need from me? Or how am I showing up for you? It's the old adage of what's in it for me. I think that's all that anybody cares about. I think it's how you frame the questions and how you show up. And you also talked about authenticity. Like, are you asking from an authentic place? Do you actually care what the answers are? And what are you going to do with that information when you extract it? Right. Um, Now I can hear in the minds of the listeners who are listening to this right now, they're like, well, that's all fine and good, but I don't have time for that. I am so busy. How can I possibly go out and, do these interviews and ask for feedback and take action on the feedback that I get? So what advice do you have for extremely overwhelmed, busy executives who might authentically want to do this, but may just not even have the time or bandwidth to engage in this type of activity?
The words of a CEO who I worked directly with come to mind when somebody on the executive team would say something like, "I don't have the time." And his answer always was, well, that tells me that you don't think this is a priority. Because if you thought it was a priority, you'd make time for it.
Mhm.
So, uh, the higher you go in the organization, the busier you are. You cover a much greater range of topics of criticality. But you also have some of the most discretion anywhere in the line organization to be able to adjust your schedule, right? So I'm not saying go and have coffee every morning for 2 hours on the manufacturing floor. What I am saying is think of who matters, right? In terms of the motions that you're trying to execute in GTM or a
Mm.
partner centric relationship that's quite fragile at the moment and who could help you most and how do you need to help them to understand the stakes, right, for this organization and why a big part of what you're going to be doing depends on them, right? That can't occur through a memo. It can't occur through 5 degrees of delegation. It needs to come from like, hey, I need to chat with you for a second to get your perspective on this new partnership or this product that seems to be returned at a much higher rate. Can we just talk about this for a minute? And I find that it informs you in ways that you ordinarily wouldn't get because usually by the time information gets to our level, it's filtered and you don't get that raw, kind of, spidey sense of like what's really being said here.
Mhm. Mhm. Oh, so good. So good. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit about your career trajectory. You've had a very unique and extensive
It did not
background.
go like this.
It rarely does. I think it rarely does. I think we have this perception that everyone has been very strategic from moment one. They went to college for a specific thing, they got a job, and, everything just opened up in front of them, especially for very, very successful leaders. But, um, I've talked to a lot of leaders, and I think everyone kind of has the jagged line that takes them to where they are now. Um, but you have a very interesting career because at this particular moment in time, you straddle both executive leadership and also academia. So you teach as an adjunct professor on the side. And these are two worlds that could not be more different. They move at different speeds. You have, different clients, different stakeholders. And so I'd love to hear from you a couple different things, but let's start with, how do you personally balance like that long range reflection of academia of like what's coming next with the urgent execution of what's happening in corporate and the boardroom and all of your stakeholders in corporate?
Yeah, so let's go back to like what motivates me to want to even do this, right? So throughout all of my different aspects of my career, it's always been motivated in service to others, right? So when I was in public service as a paramedic, I really didn't think I was going to wind up in business. At the moment, I just wanted to help people in their time of need. And as I
Mm,
reflect on that, that was a while ago, right? And now I'm in this different phase of life. That sentiment is still as strong as ever. So making time to give back is a priority for me. Um, it doesn't mean that it's easy, right? But I'm in a position to be able to do it. And so I prioritize it. I also strongly feel, right, that a lot has changed in the corporate environment where onboarding seems to have taken a backseat in terms of its effectiveness. Ongoing education, depending on the industry, might suffer a little bit. So, my question to my peer executives is how are we investing in our future, right? That, people more so than ever have less loyalty to organizations.
mhm,
So we may not be able to develop from a knowledge management perspective of having a workforce that stays with us for 20 or 30 years, we might have a very transient workforce. So, how do we give
mhm,
back to make sure that the people who are coming through the front door, while they're with us, they feel as if like we're investing in them, and you know, um, as they're moving the chess pieces on their own game, that they feel as if like they know how they could help us, like when we need them most. And for me, it's giving back. It's working directly in the classroom with up and coming marketing students. It's writing a book on business acumen for marketers because I feel as if like the message that they're getting in academia isn't always exactly what the C-suite has to think about things. So it's a priority, and I hope more executives will find a way to do it. If not, as a adjunct instructor, be a guest lecturer, right? You'd be surprised how much your presence will inspire people to not only want to work for your company, maybe, but also to take on a path that they weren't even thinking was possible for them.
mhm, mhm. And it always feels good to give back. But in my experience of doing speaking engagements and whatnot, it feels good to share your wisdom with others.
It does. It's
Um,
also a little bit of a proving ground. Like you can test how you introduce things, and if you get the curious look of like not getting it, that's an important look in the mirror too. Like being able to articulate yourself succinctly at a level that's you know um, appropriate for that particular group. That's all intentional, and you can easily get that wrong if you leave it to chance of what you're going to say.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. One of the things that I really study and analyze is the future of the workforce and how career paths are changing over time. So we can look at this from a couple different perspectives because you work with executives, but you also work with young professionals who are just entering the workforce. So one thing that I talk a lot about is building a portfolio career. So, I think the 9 to 5 as we know it today is very rapidly changing. And our younger folks, I think, are going to enter into more of a gig economy where they might have a series of contracts that they string together. Or, I think our younger folks have to think a little bit more business minded of how do
Oh
I
yeah.
promote and position myself as a business owner that may have multiple simultaneous projects going at the same time. Instead of a full-time gig, because organizations are laying people off in droves right now. And even when they do hire people back, if they do, I think it'll be a lot more contract type work than it will be the FTE positions that we know. So I think for younger people, they have to think about creating a portfolio career of multiple opportunities strung together. And then for senior executives, oftentimes I hear folks say, well, I don't know that I'm ever going to quote unquote retire. Maybe I will take on what I call an encore role. So it's like once you've, given up the C-suite or, senior level role, what else is there? And a lot of people do take to academia or start a consulting practice. So I'd love to hear from your perspective, how did that come about for you? And or what advice might you have for both senior level leaders as well as our younger folks who are just now entering the workforce?
There is so much to unpack here. Let's try to get this in little bite-sized bits. How did it happen for me? It's happened in two substantial ways along my journey. One was deciding to leave, emergency medicine when that was my entire identity for a really long period of time. That came out of just like, I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't want to do this job anymore. So that was just kind of like one of those natural, I've hit the end of the road. There's a fork here. I'm going to go right. Right.
Hmm.
The second time, after working for a long period of time in a multinational company where we decided as a company that my division was no longer relevant, right? And so the place that I thought I was going to stay at, maybe for the rest of my life, now is in the rearview mirror, right? And so these two things influence the advice that I'm going to give to anybody who's listening. One, nothing is forever. Even the things that you love dearly, right, in terms of work or projects or a mission or a cause, it's going to come to a natural point where you're going to say, maybe it's time for me to move, or somebody else decides that for you, right? So if you were to think about like your what's next, because not everybody can think 5 or 10 years out, and it's even hard, even if you think that way, to like manifest it, right? Like the universe gets a vote in terms of what's going to happen to you. So be open to other things, try other things, step way outside of your comfort zone to meet other people, um, to consider different perspectives, to take on a project that you know squat about, right? Just like I'm gonna raise my hand and I'm gonna help with this because it's interesting to me and I don't know anything about it. I think that type of mindset, when you stitch all that thinking together, creates a little bit of the muscle memory of like being open to change. I've seen so many people in my research around business become entrenched around a particular idea that holds their business back, it holds them back, it limits their impact, and it's a real problem.
I love what you said. Nothing lasts forever. Uh, Go way outside of your comfort zone, test, experiment, try new things, and see what resonates with you. And then also, the universe has a vote, right? So we cannot control our destiny as much as we might want to, but I think it is about trial and error and getting out there and trying new and different things, no matter what stage of your career that you're in, and seeing what sticks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's perfectly fine to try new things and conclude, I don't think I really want to do that again. But you're going to learn something that probably could be applied to something that is relevant to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, David, you often talk about mental fences, these invisible limits that leaders don't even know that they have or that they built for themselves, right? What's one mental fence that you have personally had to break through? And how did that shift your career trajectory?
I'm going to tell you a very private and personal story that I've started to tell people was really comes from my youth. When I was a young man, I felt I wasn't smart enough to go to college. Um, Now, there was nothing that really happened in my life to, you know, say definitively that that was the truth. But influenced my decision making, right? To go to more technical types of things, even though paramedic school is not a walk in the park, right? And I know I made a big difference in a lot of people's lives, so I was smart enough to do that. But that mental fence took a bit of undoing, and I now see it all the time, like in very sophisticated conversations about um, mission related types of things that people will interject things like, well, we can't do that because, or that's not how we're funded, or whatever. And it's really placing limitations over what's possible, that we run into a bias, we accept it as a law of nature as opposed to something that's, permeable and can be malleable and shaped, right? We just,
Mhm.
regard these things as, these fences that can't be moved. So we acquiesce, we give up our power, and we give up possibility to these imaginary made up rules.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so good. Thank you for sharing a personal story there. Um, and you're in the midst of writing a book. Tell us about your book.
The book came from mentoring early stage marketers, and in talking with them and understanding their ambitions, that they really lacked the business acumen that's demanded, right, by current employers. And it really just became, hey, let's meet, once a month and talk through your progress. And as more and more of those things happen, I realized these weren't outliers. These weren't smart people who just didn't kind of get it. This was more and more what I consider to be, and I don't use this word lightly, a trend. That what's happening here as to why people are thinking, for example, as a digital marketer, right? And this, they've got their lane, and they imagine what the world is going to be like when they get employed as a digital marketer. And it couldn't be farther from the truth, right? Like you're not going to go and just create, you know, um, outbound communication, or do all sorts of other fun things, right? There's a part of it, but it's got to link to a business strategy. There's got to be a business case built into this. There's got to be some cause and effect surety of like, here's how we know this is going to work and why it's relevant. And so you really need to be more T-shaped, right? The vertical aspect of the T is the deep competence, right, that we acquire when we go to school to finance, marketing, logistics. It doesn't matter. Pick your T, right? And that's the vertical aspect of it. By the way, what's often overlooked is I got my degree, so now I'm an expert. And really, by definition, an undergraduate degree, you're nowhere near being an expert, right? You're kind of at that advanced beginner stage. So you don't
Yeah.
even have all the tools in your toolbox by the time that you finish undergraduate school. Maybe
Yeah.
with a master's degree and 10 years of really intense focus time, you're getting closer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the horizontal piece is being able to be cross functional. I can talk to finance as a partner, not as somebody who's going to be a gatekeeper saying yes or no, right? I can
Mm.
help logistics to understand like why this is a priority and how seasonality affects our product, right? When you can go and have conversations in different functions and offer something to them that's useful to them and learn from their point of view how it affects, your mandate, that's a whole other animal, right? And that's what's expected of, I'm not just talking only marketers, but that was the basis of my book research. That employers want, entry level people to be functioning at a level that's really kind of higher than they're ready for. So that needs to be intentional. And listen, this is all doable. You just have to step outside of your comfort zone again, and ask yourself one key question: who else cares, right, about this thing I'm creating, right? Um, and you may not have the mental recognition, but you could ask questions like you could ask your boss, who else is this really important to? Right. And bosses are floored when people ask questions like that because you're communicating a more holistic point of view as opposed to, well, you asked me for this and I'm going to give you this thing, right? That's a different game.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the name of your book and when is it expected to launch?
The book is called Marketing to a T, and look for it in the first quarter of next year.
Fantastic. And where can people find out more about you?
LinkedIn, David LaCombe.
Perfect. David, thank you so much for being on the Infinite Leaders podcast. It's been an honor and a pleasure to speak with you here today. And I look forward to hearing more from you.
Sonja, the honor was mine. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Thank you for joining us for another game-changing episode of the Infinite Leaders podcast. Remember, leadership is not about slogans and one-off events. It's about strategic operating systems, sustainable rhythms, and real results. If today's conversation gave you a spark, do not let it fade. Whether you're navigating change, breaking through organizational roadblocks, or building high-performing teams, take the next step with the Infinite Edge Audit, a low-investment, corporate card-friendly plan to future-proof your career and fast-track your next professional move. Need support for your team? Well, we do that too. We empower leadership development that delivers measurable results, team alignment that breaks down silos, and organizational results that actually stick. So head on over to infiniteleaders.vip right now. That's infiniteleaders.vip.